This is the nature of things.
This here, for example, is not in a natural state. You can see here the skull is put here, the rib cage is here.
Who are these people? Who are the Pericu?
So you could see they're cutting pieces of the burial in flesh.
Pericu went extinct by European diseases. There may be not any Pericu left, but their genes might be left, and the bones can build us that link. You know, when you look at science, you look at what is the question? And the question is, can we address the ancestry of a lost people? And my answer is unequivocally, yes.
The problem with the legacy of the Pericu Indians is that they left so little behind to tell us about themselves. So their story has had to wait until science could reveal it. Dr. Eldon Molto believes it's in the bones and the DNA of the last lost people of the Americas. Mexico's Baja Peninsula. It's a place of superlatives. The incredible desert, the azure sea, dust and dryness, ragged mountains, as beautiful as it is inhospitable. Baja California, the original California, named long before the American state, is mostly desert. Baja starts at the U.S. border and stretches south till it hits the rugged and mountainous Cape. In a dusty old southern Baja museum hang the portraits of the ranchers and miners who built communities here. The mementos of their lives carefully arranged on display. And in a corner of the collection, behind some scuffed glass cases, are the skulls of some Indians. The last remains of the Pericu, a tough, isolated tribe that lived here for thousands of years, before they were declared extinct a century ago. The history of Baja California has always been about taming the landscape, but it's also about the disappearance of the peninsula's original people. The Pericu never built the pyramids of the Mayans or the cities of the Aztecs. They have never had their place in the historical record alongside other ancient peoples of the Americas because they disappeared before anyone could study them.
I didn't know they even had burials down here. I didn't know they had anything. They told me they cremated the remains. If you look at your tourist magazines, I came down here as a tourist. And then I realized, wow, what an area. The richest area of anthropological, archaeological research in North America is right here in the Baja Peninsula. And I didn't know that.
Dr. Eldon Molto is an expert on bones. He can pick one up and tell you whether it was old or young, diseased or clean. Give him a little longer, and he can figure out where the owner of that bone lived, what he ate, where he got his water. El says the study of human identity by way of bones is like writing an osteobiography.
this
Okay.
skull obviously is a female.
Okay.
Muscle markings are limited on the malar bone. You can see on the occiput that
Okay.
there's a very tiny, a very small nuchal line, very small, and the mastoids are little, so it's unequivocally female.
Female.
In a lab at the University of Baja California Sur in La Paz, Dr. Eldon Molto leads Dr. Fermin Regadas through the list of morphological traits on an odd Pericu skull, trying to figure out where it fits into the baffling Pericu story.
Traditionally, we were interested in civilizations. So the Aztecs, the Incas, and everything became, the most important part of anthropology. And so this area became, what do they say, a zone de notre, a zone of nothing.
And as we clean it, let me just go, we start to see the skull. As we clean it, the teeth, and then we go to the back side.
There you go.
And here we go. Those are sharp teeth, carcharodon, carcharis, like a crown.
A first for two very experienced men of science, like a scene out of a fantasy.
Like a surrounded. And
The ancient skull of a woman, embedded with a protective crown of shark's teeth. And at this point, they can only guess why. But El Molto believes there is a process for solving a mystery like the Pericu. He just needs to find it. And if past experience is anything to go by, that process will solve some mysteries about ourselves as well. 61-year-old Dr. El Molto jogs about 1 hour a day, even in the 40-degree Mexican heat. The run helps rearrange the thoughts in his head. He's always had a very active, very broad scientific mind.
When I was a young kid, I used to raise tropical fish and got into genetic studies at age 12 when I was trying to make an all-black strain of guppy.
El was a junior B hockey player in Toronto who became an expert in paleogenetics, human morphology, and ancient DNA. He's traveled the world collecting samples from all kinds of sites, and then he takes them back to his lab, which is far away from Mexico on the north shore of Lake Superior in Thunder Bay. At first, a mining and forestry town like Thunder Bay seems like an unlikely spot as a center for state-of-the-art genetic research. But El was a professor at local Lakehead University for 30 years, from where he helped police forces and forensic scientists solve some particularly tough cases.
After taking some courses with the FBI, they didn't have any molecular biology at Lakehead at all, so we developed what we call an applied biomedical research thing for molecular studies. That's a PhD now. And I guess I feel very proud because I brought molecular studies to the city of Thunder Bay.
If you're not specifically looking for Molecular World Incorporated, chances are you won't stumble across its back alley door. The lab takes up the back of an old bank and the entire underground vault. El and the Molecular World team work with ancient DNA. Getting DNA out of an old bone isn't easy. The material can be degraded, and the DNA may only exist in very small fragments, if at all. So El figured out protocols to harvest DNA from the tiniest samples.
We can get DNA from as little a sample as 10 picograms, 10 billionths of a gram.
El realized that his pioneering techniques in ancient DNA could have much wider, modern applications in fighting crime.
If you can get DNA from ancient samples, then the rest is duck soup, modern samples. The techniques that we use for ancient DNA are now borrowed for mass disaster research, human rights violations, degraded tissues. They're turning to the ancient DNA world to get the better protocols so they can get better results. And so that's how it's really helped the modern science.
For El, everything is a whodunit. Who murdered a child? Who robbed a bank? It's all revealed in the science. and he believes the science will eventually give him answers about the Pericu.
And I suspect there's Pericu genes existing in the peninsula down here. You know, that's the beauty, is the Pericu genes never left. The people as a people left, and culturally. So you can take away their culture, but you can't take away the people.
The study of the Pericu was almost written off before it began. A Dutch ethnographer came looking for them in 1883, only to declare them extinct. There was nothing left but the bones. In a lab at the University in La Paz, Luis Herrera is sculpting a Pericu facial reconstruction. The Pericu had hyperdolic skulls, long and narrow from the front to the back. It's the most easily recognized feature in Pericu pathology. As for this person's identity, her eyes, her lips, and skin, Luis can only make an educated guess, since no known Pericu photos or portraits exist.
The thing you want to achieve is a resemblance of the living person so high that if a relative saw it, he or she could recognize the kin, the closeness, okay, because of the features of the face.
The Pericu became known to the world in 1533. After conquistador Hernan Cortes had crushed the empire of the Aztecs, he sailed north, searching for a mythical island of gold. Instead, he found the fierce and independent Pericu. After what Cortes had seen of the Aztecs, this was like going back in time.
These are very, very powerful male. As you can see, the thick brow. Look how big the brows are. Mm-hmm. Mucho grande. Que hombre. What a man.
The most extensive Pericu bone collection is in the Anthropology Museum in La Paz. Dr. Alfonso Rosales is an expert on burials, and he can read a lot into Pericu funerary practices. But El's expertise is essential when it comes to actually interpreting the bones.
And you also see here another characteristic of the Pericu is they have a lot of trauma. 60% of Pericu skeletons have healed wounds or other trauma. So we think they're fighting for shellfish, water, cacti, and women, not necessarily in that order.
Early on, Cortes sent a group of Spanish settlers to establish a colony near La Paz. They tried to farm, but it was pointless. None of their European crops would grow, and they left within a year. And yet the Pericu had survived here for millennia. Their morphological record showed they were incredibly healthy, in a land that the Europeans said yielded nothing but scrub and cactus. How could this be? A steaming pot of sheep and agave cactus stew, pulled up out of an earth oven.
You cannot eat the agave heart if it's not roast. Because it's a little poison.
Okay.
This is old-time know-how. The ancestors of these rancheros learned how to eat the local plants directly from the Pericu, and the methods for using those plants have been passed down through the generations.
With the leaves of the agave, now it's editable. If it's not cooked, it's poison. It reminds like, how good it is. It reminds me like sugar cane. Okay, it's a very rich in carbohydrates.
Fermin and the rancheros are going to take El Molto by mule train to the difficult backcountry of the Sierra La Lagunas, a place Fermin believes was an important Pericu habitat. These Mexican cowboys are descended from Spaniards who came to protect the Jesuit missions 300 years ago. Spaniards who knew the Pericu.
The Indians' culture disappeared, but the ranchers were the people who met them, married them, and learned the use of plants.
The texture reminds me of moose.
Fermin wants to show El that even in the most desperate dry season, sustenance is available if you know where to look. But water will be sparse. Fermin admits that even with his years of experience, he would perish if he's not careful in the dangerous Baja backcountry. In the spirit of the old rancheros, Professor Fermin Regadas wears a traditional leather Spanish outfit called a cuera to protect him from cactus spines and thorns. From here, it looks like nothing but dry scrub. But in the corners of the Sierra La Lagunas, there is food enough to survive in an otherwise hostile environment.
There is a mountain, a huge mountain, 6,000 feet high, and there is different ecosystems in the way up. And I want to show El, who is an expert of diet, the different sources of the diet of the Pericu. This is like gonna be an example in real life and walking all the path of the Pericu.
In the different plants and in the water, there are isotopes, different forms of elements like oxygen or nitrogen that transfer from food sources to human bodies and eventually turn up in the bones. El wants to find out if the signatures of stable isotopes from the mountains match what he's found in the Pericu remains in other parts of the Baja.
The fruit looks very hairy and there are spines. Not very attractive, isn't it?
See.
But let's see one. We are in June, the driest. Hasn't rained a drop. Want to try?
Well,
Let me show you.
you eat it first.
Okay.
Sweet.
Super sweet. And now you have an amaranthus. This fruit, look a grape, like a grapes.
Yeah, blue grapes, yeah.
This is the Pericu grape. Wow, I just put the name. Levelama. It's a Bumelia family. Look, it's juicy.
You said the fruit is good, but the seed is poisonous, right?
No, this one no. Try it.
That's good.
It's almost like a
Very sweet.
very sweet. We are at 23 degrees, 37 north. We are almost in the Tropic of Cancer.
Right.
Okay? And 109 degrees, 59 seconds. We are in altitude of 1,015 meters over sea level. Okay?
It's important to have this though because isotopes change. Same plant from the coast, height, everything
Even if the
changes.
same species?
Exactly.
That's interesting. The only thing we need to find is water. Let's go another spot. This season is like the last dry month of the year, June. And if you travel like the way we are doing, it can be deadly if you don't know where to find water.
There's an isotope in the water here, oxygen. It's called O18 and O16, and it tells you your water source. Because you've got all these widely spaced water sources here, they can even tell you which region the people are living most of their lives in. This particular result here will collect evidence from all the different water sources, and that gets into the bones and particularly the teeth.
Yep.
and that means you know where they were growing up. So you finally get this little connection for your trees and your animals and the bones and the teeth in the water.
The isotopes become ingested markers on the human map of the Pericu. By matching the isotopes of the wilderness to the isotopes in human bones, El and Fermin can figure out the hunting and gathering range of the Pericu, from the seashore to the mountaintops.
Baja California, denme guitarra.
The large trees up here are oak, and they exist nowhere else in the Baja. In fact, you won't find them growing anywhere else north of here until you get near the U.S. border, more than 1,600 kilometers away. The trees are biological anomalies, much like the Pericu people were. They are remnants of another ecological time, trapped here by desert, by the ocean, and by the sea. The question is, how did they end up here in the first place, and from where? El and Fermin believed that the Pericu's ancestors were part of the diaspora that crossed the land bridge from Asia near the end of the last ice age 18,000 years ago. In fact, the Pericu genetic database that El has started building suggests that they share DNA traits with other natives of the Americas. The Pericu's ancestors followed game down the length of the Baja Peninsula, which was then a combination of forests and savanna. As the ice sheet melted, the waters rose and the climate changed. Suddenly, the Baja was a desert, and trapped in a cul-de-sac at the tip were the Pericu. The Pericu adapted to their new environment by hunting and gathering, and there is evidence that they didn't just find their food on land.
Had a hit. Yeah, oh, it was a hit.
Something get it?
It missed a hit though.
Yeah?
Yeah. Had a strike.
The Sea of Cortez is rich with sea life. Sport fishermen come here from all around the world. The isotope record of the Pericu bones shows that they were out here too, hunting and fishing for food. A large part of the Pericu's protein would have been found at sea: mollusks, fish. Researchers even found the skeleton of a seal at an inland Pericu burial site.
Well, the bones of the Pericu, or the Las Palmas bones, are among the most enriched in nitrogen and carbon in the record. So their bones are exceptionally rich, and I think it's because I would think half of their diet came from the sea, personally.
They were in the mountains. They were out at sea. The Pericu ruled this part of the world. Then they disappeared. Or did they? That's the tricky question El has to answer.
And now with the Pericu, we're trying to resurrect their ancestry. The Pericu were a nation that were unknown, and now they're going to be known genetically. DNA is the power that puts everything together.
The Pericu are like a culture in storage, a catalog left waiting till science can catch up and identify who they were. But for El, they are more than that. They are a chapter in the human story. And since we are all family, they may have something to tell us about ourselves.
It just means the continuity of the human race, if you will.
Take these students at the University of La Paz. Every one of them has a sense of identity. Most have probably heard stories about the origins of their parents and grandparents. They'll each have a pretty good idea about their ancestry. But what if you could pull one aside, look deep into her DNA, and tell her she doesn't know the whole story? What if you could tell her that her story gets more complicated once you follow the roots past her great-grandparents and their great-grandparents? What if you could tell her she's not who she thought she was? DNA can allow us to do that. DNA has been called the blueprint of life, but El calls it the blueprint of identity. His specialty is figuring out new ways to find DNA and then match it with existing databases to help find out who a person was. El was part of a team that identified the remains of a baby who died on the Titanic and was buried in Halifax. For close to a century, the boy was thought to be Swedish, but El helped prove he was British. His lab helped identify these Canadian airmen shot down in World War II. Their bomber was recently found in a swamp in Poland. This was Pilot Officer George Alfred Chapman. El isolated his remains by matching DNA found in the bones with the DNA of his sister, who is still alive and living in Canada. They solved a cold case in Winnipeg. Candace Dirksen was murdered in 1984, and it was 20 years before El was asked to make a DNA match that the RCMP were not equipped to make. And in 2006, El's lab helped prosecutors in Ontario get the first ever murder conviction in Canada based on mitochondrial DNA found at the scene of a crime in one strand of a killer's hair. The key to all of these solved mysteries is mitochondrial DNA. So what is mitochondrial DNA? You may recall from science class that a cell looks like this, with a cell wall around the outside and a nucleus in the middle. Floating in the cytoplasm around the nucleus are thousands of mitochondria. Each one carries the DNA signature from the maternal side of your family. Each one links you to your mother.
The women carry the mitochondrial DNA, and that's what we're tracing. And the threads of the past can be traced for many generations, maybe 15, maybe 20.
There is a lot of mitochondrial DNA, and they can last for thousands of years after we die, adhering to calcium in bones and in teeth once the cells degrade. Ancient or modern, the DNA extraction process is painstakingly repetitive. The key is that the sample and the lab space are both spotless, so that nothing can be contaminated. In this case, the sample is a Pericu bone that El collected in Baja several years ago. They take a small section of the bone and begin the decontamination process. The point is to reduce the sample to a powder to isolate the DNA. And once they have isolated the DNA, they compare it to a worldwide database to see if the DNA matches any other that are already on file.
The mitochondrial DNA databases are broken down ethnically and geographically. And there's collectively about 15,000 that we have now that we can access to scan in the computers.
What we're looking at here are little sections of the mitochondrial DNA that are significant because that's what allows us to actually compare information between two individuals. So they're not the whole mitochondrial genome, but just important little sections that distinguish between maternal lineages.
So the links from mother to daughter, to granddaughter to great-granddaughter, and on down the family tree, emerged like a genetic trail through the centuries.
An Indian woman marries a Spanish conquistador. They have 4 baby girls, and those 4 baby girls have girls, and when these people are dead, you can still see that lineage that represents a native lineage.
The story is told that European diseases did the Pericu in, and the culture is certainly gone. But a genetic profile of that lost culture may still be possible. El has harvested DNA from all the known Pericu skeletons in museum collections. He's got over 100 profiles, but he needs more. The problem is that there are no new bone samples at the moment, so El is going to take an unusual step. He's going to go looking for living Pericu DNA, hoping that someone in Baja is still carrying the genes of a culture that died. This is not the first Pericu bust that Luis Herrera has worked on. He unveiled another one at the museum recently. A woman came in, took a step back, and said the face looked like her mother. She said her mother was an Indian from the southern Baja. That raised a whole new question. What if some of the Pericu DNA that El has been looking for still exists in living people?
As long as you got a link, as long as there's a female link, the generations can be looked at no matter what.
El's colleague, Fermín Regatas, found the woman who said her mother was an Indian. Her name is Berta, and if her mother had Pericu mitochondrial DNA, then Berta has it as well. Fermín collected a DNA sample from her. Then he sent the sample to El's lab in Thunder Bay. Now they are waiting for the results. Sometimes it takes weeks.
Uno, dos, tres.
In the meantime, Fermín has heard of a rancher who claims his mother was an Indian, so Fermín and El are going to try to find him.
Well, we got to make sure his mother is Indian.
Yeah, that's the one. Okay.
There may be a chance now they'll go from no Pericus in Baja to two, at least two genetically.
2 kilometers. Let's go to the 2 kilometers. ¿Sale? ¿Y qué dirección? ¿Derecho hacia...? ¿Y dice el barranco? Gracias. It's like 7 kilometers, and they will show in a sign.
So how old is this man, do you know?
It's old, 7 kilometers. And there is a worker here that is just like an Indian. No.
I'm certain that there is going to be native blood here that is Pericu.
I should ask somebody. Buenas tardes.
Then, while asking directions, Fermín meets a woman who looks unique. El immediately decides to ask for permission to sample her DNA.
You give them the instructions. She rinses her mouth.
Okay.
Does it twice.
Yes.
And then she takes the swab and tell her to go up and down on one side, then turn the swab over and do it again, and then stick it in the thing.
Perfect. Okay. Let's
That's
go.
all we need.
Okay. Good luck.
First of all, she's very different looking. And the first thing I was looking, of course, was for the narrowness of the face and the length of her head. I'd seen some renditions of what the Pericu look like, and she's certainly not mainland Indian. There's no way she's mainland. She doesn't look Hispanic.
Y con eso hace un par de buches y lo puede tirar ahí. Así como.
Yeah.
¿Sí? Como si fuera una paleta por dentro, entre los dientes. Así.
Yeah, that's it.
Así, hacia arriba y hacia abajo. Como si se lavara el diente por afuera.
Tell her to turn it as well.
Ahora del otro lado. ¿Sí?
Salió un maestro. Viven en Santo Domingo con la familia.
Entonces, ahora se hace.
You probably got 1,000 picograms of DNA right there. So that's plenty of DNA.
Bueno, con esto.
¿Dónde es hijos?
¿Dónde están ellos?
Pues están desparramados por hay unos en San José, otros en Los Cabos, otros en Pescadero, otros en Ciudad Constitución, La Paz. Por donde quieran,
por
sí.
todos lados.
Peor las mujeres. 7 mujeres y 5 hombres.
7 mujeres.
Hermelinda Tamaya Salgado's mitochondrial DNA is all over the Baja, moving along with her children. Even though Elle and Fermin won't end up finding the man they were looking for out here in the first place, they will head back to La Paz more than satisfied. They may be on the verge of finding a Pericu missing link. They need to get back to La Paz and make a phone call to Thunder Bay. The lab results will tell them if they found a connection to a century of lost human history.
Enter our 5th Nature in Focus contest. Send us your photos, and you could win a grand prize trip to Quebec City, or you could win a Nikon camera. Winners will be published in Harrowsmith magazine. Visit our website.
El Concholito Beach, just blocks from downtown La Paz. Over 60 ancient skeletons have washed out of the sand here. The shark-toothed skull from Fermin's office was found here too. El Concholito has proved to be the richest site of archaeology in Baja, but high-rises are going up here now. Beachfront is a hot commodity. Never mind that vacation homes may one day sit on top of an ancient cemetery that regularly disgorges bits and pieces of Pericu.
A human long bone of a child, maybe I would give him or her 6, 7, 8 years of age. You can see how rich this beach is. As I say, I think it's the richest archaeological site in Baja California.
Elle and Fermin are here this evening because they have a potential Pericu rendezvous.
Hola, Berta.
No por llegar tarde, para nada,
No.
pichilingue.
¿Cómo estás, chica?
Está bien.
¿Te
Ajá.
acuerdas que cuando viste el esqueleto dijiste se parece a mi mamá?
Sí, sí, sí.
Berta Cota is the Economic Development Officer for La Paz and quite possibly a carrier of native Baja DNA.
Hello? Bueno? Bueno?
Earlier in the afternoon,
Bueno?
Elle and Fermin got Berta's DNA test results delivered via telephone from Elle's technician, Arlene Lottie, in Thunder Bay.
Miss Arlene?
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, Arlene, we're sitting here on bated breath waiting for these results.
Thanks.
So I'm sitting here with Professor Regatas and myself and the CBC crew. I was just wondering what the results were between the Las Palmas bones and this woman who could possibly be Pericu.
Well, it's an exclusion.
It's an exclusion.
What I found was when I compared that profile to the FBI database in forensics, it was unique. And then when I compared it to the FBI database for published data, which included, I think altogether it was 11,000 people in the database or 11,000 mitochondrial lineages, that profile was still unique.
Is she in the database?
No, she's not.
She's not in the database, so it's a
She's
unique...
neither in the forensic database nor in the published database.
Not in the database. That's good news, because it means that forensic scientists the world over have never seen Berta's DNA type before.
We know that your DNA wasn't found in any other person in the world so far. So you could be part of the Pericu.
Entonces, lo más probable es que puedas ser de la línea Pericu y que es la primera vez que se detecta genéticamente esa línea. Es una línea perdida.
Your 2 children?
Sí.
Ajá, sí.
No, ella, just del...
They have the same mitochondrial DNA as you.
And your mother.
You're the first possible connection.
Y bueno, pues
So
ya estamos.
the Pericu didn't go extinct, they just merged.
Thank you very much.
Gracias. Hasta luego, lady.
Okay, so I'm going to email those right away, okay?
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks
a lot,
Have a
Ernie.
great day down there.
Oh, I'm going to have some beers.
Felicidades.
No, muchas gracias. Felicidades a ti porque eso es resultado de tu trabajo de investigación de muchos años.
Sí, bueno.
Que he seguido por ahí de cerca y eso de veras te felicito mucho.
Gracias a ti también, yo te felicito.
Y muchas gracias.
So what does all that mean? Well, genetically, Berta certainly stands out from the crowd. But El can't definitively say that Berta is Pericu yet. He hasn't collected enough DNA samples to create a reliable Pericu database. But her DNA is unlike anyone else's ever seen in the world. On top of that, the closest DNA match to her profile is Navajo. If you go back to the paths of the people who crossed the land bridge, you could conclude that those who became the Navajos stopped around here, and the others who became the Pericus kept going and wound up here. Berta's DNA makes them indigenous neighbors on the genetic map of the Americas, and that helps narrow down the details.
They claim to have Indian heritage, and who else would have been there? The Pericu. If she came out to be an Irish priest, we'd be in trouble.
Okay.
So this is good news because it means that she is...
You go to another stage.
Now we go to another stage, but she is not found anywhere. She's unique.
That's what I like.
And so this was a good result. I mean, it basically says that we're on the right trail.
The trail they are on is amazing, really. The Baja is a stark place, and the Pericu left scientists very little to go on. But El and Fermin persevered and wound up with an entirely new strain of DNA. And then they found some more. It turned out that Hermelinda Tamayo Salgado's DNA is not in the worldwide database either. Like Berta Cota, Hermelinda's genes are brand new to science. And then, a surprise, it turns out that Luis Herrera, who has spent all this time staring into the eyes of his reconstructed Pericus, is also new to the DNA database. His grandmother always claimed she had Indian blood.
So out of that little excursion, we got DNA from 3 more people, and they're all unique in the database, and they all align themselves with the North American Indian model. So that's exciting, because they all showed the same thing. That's what I find amazing. So what happened to the Pericu? Well, we knew there were thousands of them there when the Spanish came. I would think maybe 50, 60,000. By the 1800s, there was none left. But what was happening was they were being merged genetically with the incoming peoples. And I really believe this now, that there are Pericu genes alive.
This is all about identity, who we believe ourselves to be, and how that can suddenly change. Luis, Berta, and Hermelinda are not directly related to each other, but they may have ancestors out there in the wilds of the peninsula. El swears if they keep looking in the desert and the arroyos, they'll find more graves and more DNA. Until then, El will jog a lot in Thunder Bay, clearing his mind, puzzling on how he can isolate more DNA, and maybe even find a direct Pericu match to Berta or Hermelinda or Luis. Then, the Pericu story, this chapter of our collective human story, will come full circle. Next week, The Nature of Things returns with The Brain That Changes Itself. Now stay tuned as our documentary night continues. Anne-Marie McDonald brings you Doc Zone.
The internet connects us all, but power grids, hospitals, airlines, entire countries are just a few lines of code away from crashing. Web warriors, next.